My name is Daniel Semper. I'm lecturer in management at St Andrews Business School in Scotland. Did my PhD in category research at the University of Linz in Austria. Was done postdoc at VU Vienna. Still affiliated with Stockholm School of Economics. And yeah, so my background is both trained as a sociologist, but also in management. So from my training as an institutionalist, from my sociological background, I was always interested in fields, how people work together, how collectives work together, how organizations work together. And whenever I was interested in a topic, be it in my PhD, winemaking, or later on academia, for instance, open access publishing, I soon realized whether you look at it from an institutional work perspective or institutional change or a field perspective or a market category perspective, as my PhD happened to be, I soon realized every single time that this doesn't happen in isolation, right? So this happens in interrelationship with a wider sociocultural or political dimension. So I always needed or had the feeling I need to zoom out and talk about not just a particular field and the institutional processes within that field, but also how that field relates to another field, is shaped and influenced by a wider, let's say, transnational field, and how they interrelate, how they shape the trajectories of their developments, etc. So that's really what informs my interest in what's happening in fields, but also even more so what's happened across fields. Embodiment is everywhere, right? So you can't think of anything that isn't embodied. We as human beings inhabit institutions, we feel institutions, we are in awe, in fear, we experience joy, and we do that more importantly together. And I think for a long time research has undermined that role or has paid too little attention. Always prioritize the cognitive aspects, the discursive aspects, and not so much the bodily aspects. So I think that is really a lacuna that is striking and, yeah, needs attention. And that's really what motivated us. So we sought to introduce embodied forms of institutional work. So really the role of the body, the sense-making of the body, the direct bodily encounters, and what that does to humans and also non-humans. In our study on the vegan animal sanctuaries, the role of the body makes the big difference, right? So it's one thing to talk about it, it's one thing to show visuals about it or a video even, but to actually be there, live an alternative future in this prefigurative place makes all the difference, right? So you engage with animals, you engage with other people, and you see them live their lives, you see their joy, you feel their joy, you feel their pain. That, yeah, is more direct and more visceral. In institutional theory, power is a really strange phenomenon, isn't it? I mean, institutional theory is really how our processes powerfully structure our lives, our understandings of reality, but it's never really per se about power. And so for a long time, people have been lamenting that power is like the omnipresent absent in institutional theory. And if we think about different forms of power and how they've been acknowledged in institutional theory, it's often leaning towards a very heroic understanding of people fighting against specific arrangements, changing things against all odds. Be it collective, be it entrepreneurs, whatever you call them, or it's about a discursive power, right? So there's this big, grand, macro phenomenon that shapes how we make sense of things. But there isn't much else, right? And we thought, okay, thinking about the case of disableism, so how people are labeled disabled, and what that does to them and to their prospects in the workplace, cannot be explained through that, right? So it's neither just discursive, nor is it a heroic fight against preassumptions or stereotypes, right? So we started thinking about what theoretical perspectives are there, what can we work with, and we actually went back to Berger-Luckmann and their idea of reciprocal typification, because that is really the endeavor of understanding each other in terms of actorhood, right? So we see each other as institutional roles and not as personalities, right? We might fill these roles with personalities, but that is a different question. We engage with each other, particularly coming back to the question of disableism, as a non-disabled and a disabled person. And in the job marketplace, that trumps everything, really. So that person labeled disabled can have extreme valued qualities, but they're not seen because of the label, because of the categorical typification. And so we took it from there, and we developed then further by integrating Poppitz. It's a German sociologist, power sociologist, and he's written a lot about the different forms of power, but what we're really interested in is the institutional forms of power. And what really strikes us as interesting is the power positionalization of typified actors. And there we go. So we connect the two and argue that it is really tricky for people labeled with a specific disability to get out of there, because they're not seen, right? They're not seen with their personalities, with their strengths, just living under that category umbrella. And that category umbrella positions them in a specific power relations, or it renders them outside career trajectory, a regular career trajectory, right? So it's the talent and it's the disabled on the other hand. So that's really what got us into the question of power, and then we engaged more and more conceptually with the idea of power, and it became now 2 papers. I think the most important thing is, because you will hear, and I've certainly heard so many different things in that regard, find your own path, do something that you're really passionate about, that is fulfilling for you, because in the end you spend so much time on that, right? And it's sometimes a really painful process, and you better do something that you like, that kind of carries you through that process, that is enjoyable, that you think is important or matters to you. And so my own career is quite the exception, I think, in terms of it's not the usual career, and I've never really cared much about what the trends are. I've never really cared much about what others expect from me in terms of what theories to use or what topics to use. And this might be a bad example, right? So for many that doesn't work, but since you ask me, I'm quite happy with that. So I think that works for me, and I always enjoy working on my topics, and that's what really matters to me. And also I think we're often so focused on publication and outlets and forget about the work, right? Because, just look back like 20 years ago in academia, it wasn't that much about publishing. Or you had more times publishing, and you had more options. You could also publish books, etc. And I would still value that a lot. So taking the time, really engaging more deeply for a longer, extended time with topics, engage more critically with it. And sometimes it feels like we don't have the time, right? We need to publish quick and as well as possible in terms of outlet. And that limits us. That limits us a lot in terms of what we can do. And it limits us also because we don't feel we have the time. And if I look back in my papers, some of these you wouldn't recognize anymore, right? So I started writing them like 8 years ago, and they were completely different. And sometimes it just takes time, right? And also the other projects that you start during the process have an influence on the former projects, etc. So that gets richer and richer over time. And that's something I value a lot, but you need to find people who value that as well, which is not always easy. So you need to find a place, university that appreciates that approach. And I think that is probably a really important point, because when we think of universities, we typically think of the same example as like the top tier universities, right? But if you think of how many different university systems we have on that globe, right? And within each of those university fields, how many different types of universities we have, That's incredibly, right? That's an incredible number and incredible variation. I think we should be aware of that. So we might not all want to go to Stanford or to Oxford or whatever, right? So we might find a place and that we would call our home in a very different place, where we appreciate it and where, yeah, we appreciate the place, the people there, the approach taken there. So the question of fit is really important, right? So it's one thing that we have a kind of idealized understanding of where we should fit in, where we should be, what kind of researcher we should be. But again, this is absolutely stereotypical, right? And life isn't just black and white. And I think find your place, find something that you like, and yeah, love your job, love doing it. That's my advice, really. It was a pleasure. Thank you.